So 175 years ago, Darwin landed here, 26-year-old kid, really with no notion of ever discovering something as great as he did. So he came here, he only stayed 5 weeks, and he was happy to go. I mean, he was not physically attached to this place at all. It was only later in the voyage, when he had a little bit of extra time to organize his notes from the Galapagos, that he started thinking about what he had seen. And it dawned on him, species change. Now he had an idea. Now he had something to work on when he got back to England. And that's what he worked on for the next 20 years like a fiend, and really for the rest of his life. So this place gave him the direction in life that he didn't have up to that point. What Darwin was doing while he was here is he was collecting. He was taking notes of what existed in terms of plants, animals, rock samples, paying close attention to how many islands there were and what the different climates were on each of the islands, what the different landscapes were, volcanic craters, thinking about how the islands had come to be. So the Darwin that arrived here was not the great theorist that we know today. He was a 26-year-old collector, collecting really almost at random any kind of plants, any kind of animals, any kind of rocks. He didn't even know the meaning of what he was collecting until much later. But one of the knacks that Darwin had was he realized when he collected in a particular place how variable individual species were. And that's what led him to his key insight. He realized that not every individual was the same, stamped out like a toy from a press, but there was variation. And that variation might mean that some individuals were better than others at whatever that might be, eating particular types of food, running away from predators. And then that idea percolated, and he realized that would eventually lead to very different forms of species. So Darwin didn't really recognize what was here while he was here. In fact, you could say that Darwin and the crew of the Beagle, they ate half their data and threw the rest overboard. So this was a source of fresh meat to the Beagle sailors, and they dined on tortoise from many of the islands. Only later did Darwin realize that there were so many different tortoises. He later recalled that the Spaniards told him that they could look at any shell and tell you which island it came from. And this was another clue that there were all these island-specific species here in the Galapagos.
When Darwin went to the Galapagos Islands, it was things like mockingbirds, tortoises, that really started prompting his thinking about evolution. What's interesting is the birds that bear his name, Darwin's finches, were so uninteresting to him that he didn't even bother to write down where he collected them. And the reason was They were all sort of gray, nondescript black birds, but they were living on lava. They should be black. The fact they were the same color didn't matter. And their beaks were so different, and their lifestyles were so different, he didn't even realize they were related. He was back in England when an ornithologist friend of his told him that, hey, you know, all these birds you have here over on this side of the room, they're all kind of finch warbler-like things. They're very closely related. Well, as soon as he was told that, he instantly understood what it meant. And what it meant was that must have been an ancestral bird that came when there was a time when the only birds on the Galapagos Islands were seabirds. A land bird made it out there, a finch. And it had no competition. There were no other birds who were eating cactus, who were eating insects, who were eating seeds. All of these food sources were available to it. And by modifying its beak, it was able to take advantage of them all. And Darwin immediately understood all that and used that then as a very prominent example when explaining how evolution actually worked.
The first mystery in Darwin's time was, do species even change? Were species just created in an instant and placed in a particular place on Earth to exist for a particularly specified period of time and then, I guess, perhaps disappear? Or did species come from other species? And what Darwin figured out was that species come from other species. And I think a tremendous advantage Darwin had was his geological training. He understood time. And the only way you could imagine this whole pageant unfolding is if you had enough time. And he realized the Earth was much older than people at the time had been thinking. And that gave a whole lot more time for the evolutionary process to unfold. And so his leap of imagination was that there was enough time for very simple things to evolve into very complex things and many, many, many different complex things to evolve.